Greetings, family. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is June Allen, and from juneallen.net, and I'm a racial trauma therapist, business coach, speaker, soon to be author, and I'm so grateful to be with you today. It's been a little while since I've done a video or live stream or anything like that. I took a bit of time out. I really, really needed that time. But this week, I wanted to come back and have a conversation with you because this week is my 15-year anniversary of being in recovery, and I am so incredibly grateful. And so I thought it would be a really nice time for me to come back and share with you the promises of recovery, how the promises have shown up in my life. And I thought this was a really beautiful opportunity as well to give any newcomers a taste of what can happen for you, what can happen in your life if you work the steps, if you work your recovery program, if you commit to doing therapy, if you just commit to this healing process, the miracles that can happen for you in recovery. And yeah, as a black queer therapist doing this work, it's been a long road. It's been a really, really long road. But I'm incredibly grateful for the challenges, um, for the miracles, for all of the things that have happened. And so, yeah, I've just kind of written down some bullet points of the things that have changed, that have happened for me over the years. And I hope that, whether you're new to recovery or whether you've been in recovery a long time and not really, maybe you're not doing the racial sobriety work and you want to know actually, how things can change, how the depth of the healing can really go deep, when you really commit to doing this work. Yeah, this work around racial sobriety. So let's dive in. So the first thing that I found that's really changed for me over the years is my relationship with my higher power. Now, this is something that I've always struggled with in recovery because, I grew up in a very kind of strict kind of religious background. My parents were a Christian Pentecostal church. I grew up in the black church. My dad was a my dad was a pastor and stuff like that. And so my relationship with my higher power, um, it had to change because I just couldn't relate to that. I couldn't relate to that. And so, you know, this image that I had in my head around, Jesus being white, when I was at home as well, I remember my parents having these pictures up of white Jesus. I'm sure if you're black, you might know what I'm talking about. The pictures of the Last Supper, the 12 disciples with white Jesus, all of that, the 3D pictures. I'm sure that you've at them, you must know what I'm talking about. But I just couldn't relate to any of that. And actually, I felt very resentful towards it because to me, it just kind of, the story that I told myself about that is that white people were more spiritual, they were more important. And, anything to do with spirituality or goodness or anything like that was always, white, and I just couldn't relate to that. So there was a huge resentment around, in recovery, when they would talk about higher power, God, whatever, that there was this white person that I was supposed to bow down to. So I really struggled with that. But what I did over the years is, as I began to understand more about how religion had been, or spirituality, let me say it that way, how spirituality had been whitewashed, and understanding my relationship to it, and then obviously thinking about my history and how a lot of my ancestors in Jamaica were forced to be Christian, at the end of a whip, and how they would, how African spirituality was demonized and they weren't allowed to practice their own spirituality and all of that kind of stuff. Once I realized that, once I recognized that, and I was able to then start the unlearning. I was able to start the unlearning and recognizing that that is not that is not what I want to do. That this is damaging my relationship with my higher power and my healing. So I actually had to make the decision to fire white Jesus, to fire white Jesus. And then after that, I was able to give myself permission to really explore what it means to re-embrace African spirituality. So I did a lot of reading. I started exploring things about the seven principles of my art. Started looking and reading about things like Oshun, different African deities and all of this kind of stuff, and then making a decision for myself about what that was going to look like. And that really changed everything because I noticed that once I fired White Jesus and I started having my own relationship with my higher power, then I began to talk to my higher power a lot more. I began to trust my higher power a lot more. There was a lot more synergy between the alignment between this spiritual entity, higher source. I began to see myself in that. I know that as a human being, um, I'm also a spiritual being, and therefore I am part of the bigger source, the bigger picture. And before I never thought that. I thought that I was, religion essentially teaches me that I'm separate from, God is in the white Jesus is in the clouds, and I'm so separate, and I'm a sinner, and I'm lowly and unworthy, and I'm dirty, and I'm this and I'm that. And I think there was a lot of internalized racism on top of that. Like, if I'm black as well, that just means that I'm even more unworthy than my than white people because God is white, so um internalizing all of these things, yeah, it just made it very difficult. But in unlearning these things, I began to recognize that actually I'm not separate from my higher power, I'm not separate from source, I am actually a cup of source. But what racism and oppression had done is it had disconnected me from those parts of myself. And so being in recovery and reframing spirituality as something that was part of my history, that was part of my ancestors, reclaiming that part was just so powerful. So yeah, my relationship with my higher power has very much changed. And also making, for me, obviously you have to do this on your own terms. But for me, I also changed the gender. For me, my higher power is a woman. She's a sassy black woman who, she will love on me, she will affirm me, but she will also give me the side eye, if I start doing things that are not in alignment with what my assignment is on this planet. So just those little things just made so much more of a difference to my relationship to my higher power. So if you're new and you're doing this work, think about those things. These are all going to be things that I'm going to be writing about in the book. I'm writing a book at the moment about what it means for Black people to be in recovery, things you should know if you're just starting, if you're already in recovery, how to make sure that your 12-step recovery process, regardless of the fellowship, is in alignment with your experience as a melanated person living inside systems of oppression. And this is what's missing at the moment from the recovery space. Recovery is very white middle class, and so they don't really have conversations. The books don't really talk about it. Whatever big book you're talking about, whether it's AA or whichever fellowship you're in, their core text, they don't really talk about racism and oppression or how to deal with it, as part of the recovery process. So I'm going to be helping to fill that gap. I've done a lot of service in various fellowships over the years, creating literature and doing all that kind of stuff, but it needs to be in a book. So I'm currently doing that at the moment. So if you're not signed up to my email list or whatever already, then please go to juneallen.net, and if you go to the section that says free on the menu, you'll find loads of things there that you can download. And in downloading that stuff, you will automatically be added to my email list. Okay. So let's do number two. I might have to do this in maybe two parts actually, because I'm already finding myself talking, and there's a lot of stuff that I really want to cover. But I really want to say this stuff because again, I really want the newcomers, or even people that are already in fellowship to, to really understand this. And I really want to share this so that you have an understanding around my journey, and hopefully to give you some hope about what's possible. Okay. So the second promises of recovery that I've really embraced over the years, that's really changed, is the way that I love myself. You know, when I came into recovery, I was very shame-based. I was very angry. I was very disconnected from my body, very disconnected from the reality of what it meant to be a black person. I didn't really understand, you know, denial and fantasy were the things that basically kept me alive. They're the things that kept me sane. And I know that sounds really weird because normally denial is quite often demonized, and you know, fantasy is also demonized as well. However, for me, I know that denial and fantasy were both protective outputs that protected me from all of the pain and the shame and everything that was underneath that. So, you know, in unraveling all of that and unraveling those things, you know, going to meetings, talking to a sponsor, going to therapy, doing all of that kind of stuff, as the layers came off, I began to have more acceptance around myself. I began to love myself a lot more. I was a lot more accepting of who I am as a queer person. You know, I've always been quite fluid. I've never really identified with being heterosexual. I've always been quite fluid around, my yeah, I've always been quite fluid when it comes to relationships and stuff like that. But I think over the last, particularly over, I would say over the last few years, I've been a lot more accepting of my queerness and been a lot more open around who I date and all of that kind of stuff. Been a lot more, felt a lot more freedom around who I date and stuff like that. So, you know, what comes with that is just a lot more, that acceptance is a lot more inner calm, a lot more inner peace, and a lot more, yeah, a lot more love for myself. It's just accepting who I am as a human being and yeah, in accepting myself, there's just lot less inner conflict. Yeah, there's a lot more compassion for myself. I'm a lot more curious about, you know, when things come up, when I get triggered. You know, I also I get triggered so much less. I don't get as triggered as I used to, you know, and that is because I've done so much work in accepting who I am. You know, my journey has been very much releasing a lot of stuff, owning a lot of stuff that belongs to me, giving back the stuff that doesn't belong to me. I realized that there was a lot of stuff that I'd internalized, whether it's systemic or whether it's from family of origin or old relationships, toxic relationships, whatever it is. I'd internalized a lot of stuff that didn't belong to me. And the more I kind of unloaded and drained a lot of that stuff, you know, what was left was, you know, there were wounded parts of me that needed attention, but it was a lot easier. It felt less intense because, you know, the stuff that belonged to other people, like I can't control how they behave. So there's a lot of acceptance and relief about realizing that I don't have to change other people. I can't change other people anyway, but just realizing as well that I was causing a lot of my own suffering by thinking that I had to try and change other people or try and make other people behave a certain type of way. And actually, in focusing on what other people do, it made it I actually was creating a lot of my own suffering. So, you know, in having more acceptance around, you know, I can't change, you know, other people. If other people are choosing to behave a certain way or believe a certain way or whatever, that's not my business. I get to choose whether I'm in relationship with those people or not. You know, if they're behaving in a certain way that is totally out of alignment with my values, or if they're doing things that are abusive, or if they're behaving in a certain type of way that, you know, is just not in alignment with who I am, that's their business, and I can choose to remove myself from that, whether it's family of origin, whether it's friends, whether it's, you know, people in recovery. You know, there are people, not everybody in recovery is all love and light. You know, let me say that there are racist people in recovery. You know, they might not say that directly, but there's a lot of racist shit that goes on in these rooms, you know, and so it's okay for you to set boundaries around these people and make the decision that, you know, in order for you to heal and do your own healing work, that there are certain things that you need to do to protect yourself. And, you know, practicing discernment, how you engage with people, and what you do and all of that kind of stuff. Practicing that type of discernment is you know, is a form of self-love. It's a form of self-love, but it's something that I've had to practice over the years. I've had to practice and give myself permission to say, actually, that this doesn't really work for me, and it's okay. And yes, I might feel a little bit, you know, at the beginning, I used to feel a little bit guilty, you know, that afterburn after you set a boundary with somebody. You know, that used to be really uncomfortable for me, but now I feel less, you know, the uncomfortability doesn't last that long because I know that, I understand that, it's okay for me to be myself. Again, it's a form of self-love, you know. The more present you are, the more time you over the years I've unpacked all of this stuff, it becomes easier for me to be present, you know. And this is the third one about being present. And actually, to be fair, sometimes the present isn't always a present, and there's something about decolonizing the idea of what it means to be present as well, because there's a lot of people out here that will say, oh yeah, you need to be present. Present is, and they make out that being present is the be all and end all of everything. But when you live in a black body, okay, when you live in a black body, being present is not always a present, because when you're aware and you're present with what's going on, and you live, inside these systems of oppression, James Baldwin, that was saying about, that says about, I can't remember the quote word for word, but so I'm paraphrasing, but he talks about, to be aware in these systems is to always be in a state of rage. Is to always be angry about stuff. So being present is not always a gift. It's not always a gift. But because of my recovery, I have tools. Because of therapy, I have tools now that I use, boundaries that I set in order to be able to deal with things. Okay, I can come slowly and slowly out of denial and out of fantasy, and I can sit in the reality of it. I can sit in the reality of it because I know how to take care of myself. In the past, I had to stay in fantasy and denial because I didn't know how to look after myself. I didn't know how to look after myself. I couldn't tolerate the intensity of the pain. But over the years of doing the work, working with my nervous system, learning how to self-regulate, learning how to co-regulate, all of these things have helped me understand how to take care of myself, how to understand and really look after myself, and being really, really um, fierce and protective around my boundaries. Because living in a black body, living in a black queer female body is not for the weak. It's not for the weak, you know? And so, yeah, it's a process. It's a process that I've had to really learn over time, that I've had to really take my time to find spaces where I can, safe spaces where I can really unpack, finding safe meetings. I don't go to that many mixed meetings now. I really don't. I don't go to a lot of mixed meetings now where there's white people and stuff there. They're very few and far between, because I need to be in a space where I can share. I need to be in a black or brown space where it's safe for me to share. It's safe for me to say what I need to say. Obviously, I can co-regulate better when I'm in a space where there's black and brown people, and yeah, the conversations are much richer. The conversations are much richer, So, yeah, I think, the more you do this work, the more you get honest with yourself about, what happens in your black body, how you feel about how you're feeling in the present moment in your black body, how your body is responding to whatever environment, and actually just being present in this skin. That's one of the biggest things that I've learned. That's part of living in the promises, that I can actually be alive and be present in a black body, because the system does not want me to be present in a black body. When I'm not present, okay, when we're not present in a black body, it's easier for us to be controlled. If you're disconnected from yourself, okay, for whatever reason, and you can't think. You can't think when you're disconnected. One of the biggest things actually that's really important is, what I notice is that the way that I would protect myself is I would get trapped in the intellect, because it felt too dangerous to actually be in my body. I would actually just stay in the intellect. So I would tell myself that if I understood something intellectually, then that was the healing, that I would understand it intellectually, and I could talk for Britain. I knew the language. I understood the language. I understood it intellectually, and if I can do that, then everything must be okay. But no, I learned over the years that actually that's only part of it. That at some point, the real healing had to happen when I actually gave myself permission to actually drop into my body. And I know for a lot of people, that is terrifying. And it was terrifying for me. It was terrifying for me to actually drop down into my body because, I was raised in an environment that was violent, as most of us are, but as most a lot of black people who, experienced violence when they were growing up, even, witnessed it and experienced it. I witnessed it and experienced it. I've been in, relationships that were abusive. I've been in, physical, I've been in romantic, well, don't want to use the word romantic, but I've been in toxic relationships. Let me say that were physically abusive. My body is used to abuse. So the idea of being present in my body was terrifying. But over the years, doing my recovery work, and I've done a lot of trauma work in therapy. I've done a lot of trauma work in therapy. So this is not just about your thinking. This is about the body. This is about your relationship to your body. And that is something that has changed so much. It was very difficult for me to be in relationships, to be in romantic relationships with people because, as soon as there was any sort of physical intimacy, my body would get triggered and overwhelmed and that's because I was so disconnected from my body. But over time, and this is a lifelong process, I've got to know my body a lot more. And this is where the conversation around internal consent and stuff like that is so important. So my relationship with my body has really, really changed over the years for the better. And this is all under the banner of learning how to love myself. Learning how to love myself physically, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, culturally. There are so many layers to this. And it takes time. So if you're new to this, if you're new to recovery, or if you're somebody that's been in recovery for a while but not really doing the racial sobriety work, this is what it looks like. Like I'm giving you the real rawness of it. It's going to take time for you to learn how to love your body and be present in it. Because not only do we have stuff from the past to consider, my parents are from Jamaica, so I've got 240 years of enslavement, that's in these tissues, that's in my body. you know it's important to own those things, to understand your history so that you know exactly what you're dealing with. So it's going to take time, and it has to be little and often. I have to give my body permission to speak to me, and I have to be willing and open to listen to my body, which is not always easy. But when you get to that point now where I'm at that point now where I have so much of a better relationship with my body. I have conversations with my body, the conversations around internal consent. I might decide that I want to go and do something, but when I go inside and think, actually, does my body want to do this? And sometimes my body says, no, I don't want to do it, even though my intellect is like, oh, yeah, go and do that. Go and do this, that, and the other with that person. My body's like, actually, no, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way. But the more I invite all of those different parts of myself to the table to have a conversation, that is true self-love. And then when I'm aware of what all of the different parts of me feel and think, then I'm able to communicate better with those that are close to me. I'm able to communicate a lot better in relationship. I'm able to communicate better when I'm being intimate. I'm able to communicate a lot better in friendships and stuff like that because I have a much better relationship with myself. And that's the point. That's the point. I'm going to pause it there, okay? Because I feel like I need to do a part two on this. I know this is going to be quite a long session if I continue, and there's still a lot of things that I want to talk about. So for now, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've got any questions about anything that I've shared today, then please drop me an email. You can email me at info@yardofgreatness.com. You can find all of the information about recovery, and stuff like that. If you go to, yeah, just go to juneallen.net or yardofgreatness.com, and you'll find all of the information on my website on how to yeah, how to embrace your racial sobriety and your recovery life. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your recovery, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.